set up here. I've had a little random slideshow of things going just to get started. And with some music that a friend of mine, Mr. Duncan Sheik, composed for an exhibition I had this past November and December. But there were some proper thank yous extended around, and I'm just going to reiterate a few of those things. The Spring Island Trust, really grateful that I was invited to come, and Pam, thanks for coordinating everything and doing so well with that. I appreciate it, setting me up in the cottage, and JJ and Annie have been really great. So it's and I got a proper tour from Teresa. She's over there somewhere. There she is. So it's been really great. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. I figured the best thing to do, I realized that everyone's going to run out of their drinks pretty soon and be thinking about drinks and dinner. So I'm going to try and keep it short enough so where you're not ready to leave too soon. But I'll give you a quick lineup as to what's happening so you get a sense of timing. I'm going to go through just for a little bit, maybe 20 minutes, just some background story leading up to here. And then I've got a special performance piece that I wanted to do for everybody here. It's a 12-minute piece that I performed at my previous exhibition that was in Charleston. And it's actually, I sit here and meditate while a 12-minute video piece is on me and around this whole screen here. And then as soon as that's over, we'll do a Q&A and then head out for dinner and drinks. So I kind of abbreviated the title of the talk. I think it was Natural Landscape as Self-Reflective Mirror. And just Landscape as Mirror I thought was good enough. But this image I actually took a few days ago before the clouds really socked in and it started raining. That's off the dock at the gazebo. So I thought it was appropriate with that nice mirror-like reflection. And for me, the idea of landscape as mirror is something that's kind of followed me throughout my career, where I find that a lot of times there's this idea that nature is something outside of us and separate from us, and we must engage it in that way. And for me, the idea that we are nature, and that's an idea that's been instilled in me for a really long time, offers this really nice mirror whenever I approach it. You know, the beauty and the decay and the ebb and flow and everything about the process of nature is the same process that's happening within us, and we're all built of the same component parts, the same atoms and molecules, and everything you see out there is the same things that we're made up of. So I love this idea of the landscape as a mirror for our own internal workings. So that was why the title was there. This is why I blew up the screen here so we could see some of these photographs. They're a little small, but once you get them that big, this is actually me in my father's arms when I was very little. And that's how far back I've had this really nice engagement and interconnectedness with nature. We're here at Yosemite before, let's see, there's 3 of us before 2 more came. I've got 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And this is something we would do every summer, you know, for 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks. Go to Yosemite, or we go to Desolation Wilderness, or Lake Almanor, Mount Lassen, Mammoth Lakes, anywhere to get out and spend a prolonged period of time outdoors. And so that was something that of course, everybody here seems to have a great appreciation for. So it's wonderful to be here with a group of people who share that same love of the outdoors. And then here I am a few years later with my first maybe big block art creation. And so the creative process has been something that's been with me for a long time too. From just building blocks in the house to the very first camera I ever had, I was explaining the other night, was a Kodak 110 flip camera. I don't know if anybody remembers those, but you could flip it and just stick it in your pocket. And I bought it with my allowance money and immediately started taking abstract photographs of, I had my friends up on a ledge and was asking them to jump into the ivy so I could capture them this way. So I was already, I just ran across some of those photos a few years ago, and I was surprised at how early I was starting to try and do interesting manipulative things with the camera. And I suppose part of it is, it's been instilled in me from a young age. My mother's an artist. She's always been painting started with watercolor and then moved on to oil painting, and now she does a little of both. And my father, since he retired, has been a really avid nature photographer. So it's kind of in the family. And so I've been, even with that, it being there in the family and it being instilled in me and this passion for the creative process, you know, when it came time for me to graduate from high school, there was also this sort of prevailing sentiment of get a day job. And being an artist is really challenging. It's a starving artist syndrome, not a lot of security, and it'd be much better to do something, to go get a degree in something that would allow you the ability to then work on the artwork but have some sort of stable security. And so I kind of followed that for a little while. I ended up going to my first school at UC Davis, and I was pursuing a pre-vet plan, doing biology, chemistry, physics, calculus, and art all at the same time. And after about a year of that, I decided, well, this isn't the right path. So I left school and moved back to San Diego, and started taking art classes at a local community college there in San Diego, and was really fortunate to be able to have two different people. One was a ceramic artist named Les Lawrence, who I know you guys have a strong ceramic program here, and he's one of the preeminent ceramic artists in the country, and just happened to be at this community college in San Diego, and was a wonderful teacher. And then the other guy that came into my life was this gentleman here, David Bays. This is one of his paintings, and he's an amazing artist, amazing painter, and my mother actually introduced me to him. She was taking a class from him and said, you know, she asked him, you know, David, do you need any help around your studio? My son is really trying to figure out what it's like to be an artist, for real. So, so he said, have him come by. So I'll go by his studio, and he said, if you want to come by every Friday for 6 to 8 hours and help me out, you know, I'll pay you, and you'll get an idea for what's going on around here. So I started going by there every Friday for a period of years. And it was one of those real pivotal life experiences where the light bulb clicked. It clicked on, where previous to that, I didn't really have any clear idea as to what it was like to be an artist. There was a lot of mystery around that process. And not necessarily the creative process. I kind of had that part down. It was how to be a career artist. And so being in his studio, and while he's an amazing artist and I loved everything he was doing creatively, the thing that was most impactful for me was actually seeing his work as a businessman. So his discipline, his organization, and his attention to detail and thoroughness across the board, that's where the light bulb went, and realized, well, all right, so it's just all the same things that make up being an entrepreneur are part of being an artist. And at that moment, I realized, all right, I have the right tools. I could see the vision of how to do it. And after working with him for a couple of years, I decided I was going to take a road trip. So first I went, this is the map to Charleston, but first I went up to Seattle and back, because I had never been to the Pacific Northwest. We had always done most of our outdoors time was spent in California, and there's plenty to do there. So I drove to Seattle and back, and really loved it, and responded particularly well to the Pacific Northwest. It's just wide open, and you know, the giant sequoias and the redwoods and everything about it was really just resonated for me. But then when I got back to Southern California, I had this thought, you know, I've never been to the East Coast, and maybe I should check that out too while I'm on a roll. You know, I just keep on driving, and so I decided to move to the East Coast, and I threw a dart at a map of the United States and said, I'm going to move to the closest coastal city on the East Coast, and the dart, fortunately for me, landed right near Charleston, or else I could have been hanging out in Myrtle Beach with 3 t-shirts for $10 and all the biker gangs and everything else. But Charleston, and I didn't know anything about Charleston, you know, and sometimes ignorance is bliss. So I ended up in Charleston, and you know, when I first got there, I loved it because it was so different from California. And after a number of years being there, I started to really hate it for the same reasons. I was missing the giant Sierra Nevadas, the roaring Pacific Ocean, and just so much about home I was starting to miss. And then I realized, okay, so it's clear what this place isn't when I compare it to California. So, but what is it? And at that moment where I was trying to get a sense for what it is, a good friend of mine who grew up in Charleston, he said to me something that really struck me as unusual. He said, the marsh here, if you really pay attention, is a different color every month. And I thought about it for a minute, and then I just said, that's bullshit. It's totally not. It's green, it's brown. And then I said, well, all right, I'm curious about this comment. You've been living here your whole life. I just got here. So I started really looking a little bit closer. And as I started looking closer, I became more engaged with the landscape in a different way. And when I started doing that, this series started to develop. And go ahead. I have with this series here, the easiest thing to do is going to just be to put this bit right here on a slideshow for you while I'm talking about it. So I've been working on this series for over 12, maybe 13 years now. And it started with that comment to me about the changing colors in the landscape. And as you can see, it's just, and I haven't manipulated the colors on these pieces at all. I'm really trying to work. These are photographs, and I'm wanting them for me to engage with them and for them to be realized as a plein air painter would work, where the colors are true to what was there, as true as I can get them to be. And so I started going out on my bike, with my camera, going to find really quiet places in front of the marsh and just be there and study it. And it became this really great meditative practice. And again, that whole landscape is mirror. It became this opportunity for me to meditate on the external world. And the notion that I could combine three of my greatest loves, cycling, outdoors, and photography, all at once, struck me as a goldmine as far as personally I was concerned. It seemed like a wonderful thing to do. So I've been continuing to focus on this series for quite some time now. And so this process, this particular work, I approach it more like a painter than a photographer. And I had been experimenting with the camera for a long time. And thankfully I've been using the camera long enough up till this point to be able to use it like I would use a paintbrush or a pencil, where I didn't have to think about the technical aspect, the aperture, shutter speed, the ISO, everything else was just kind of secondary, and I could just react very intuitively and organically to what was in front of me. And so this process is all, I'm moving the camera as I'm taking the photograph, and sort of blending and blurring, and trying to leave an impression of landscape rather than a very specific location. So you'll notice that this could be any marsh. And I don't want it to be a particular place, even though each one has a particular title. When I remove as many details as possible, you can then step in with your own history, and it's a much richer experience. At least that's the way I've found it. So that work has been for some time now, and at the same time, concurrently that I was working on this series, I was sort of honing my skills in a lot of different directions. And I refer to it as I look backwards, as this process of sort of building the tools that I can put in my shed for creative process. And as I did that, I'll show you some of the things that I was doing in various directions, just to give you a sense for the work. And I'll just let it run while I'm talking about it. But like with photography, I actually started to paint on my photographs. And these are photographs of photographs and then hand-painted. And so I was kind of honing all these different skills that I wanted to have access to along the way as I was shooting the photographs as well. And a lot of these are combinations. These are all photographs that I've taken and then used as references for these particular pieces. And like this work here in particular, if you turn the lights down, it turns to complete black and white. And some of these you'll see I'm painting on top of some of these photographs here. And that's intentionally blurry. So simultaneously, as these things were happening, as always happens in life, there's certain upheavals that happen along the way. And one of them was, which was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, was I had a son who was born in 2004. And his name is Bays, and he was named after David Bays, because David Bays passed away in '96. He ended up with cancer. And then 2 years later, his mother and I split up. And that ended up being sort of this moment where I ended up a year or two later really at the lowest point I've ever been. Sort of physically, emotionally, mentally, just flattened. And while I was there, I had this little voice inside of me saying, this is where you need to be. And I heard that voice, and I thought, no, I don't know how that makes any sense at all. And then I started to think more about it, and it really made sense. It was sort of, if I'm going to be at this low point, how do I want to rebuild myself on the way back up? And then suddenly I was curious and sort of excited about that prospect. And I could go ahead and get rid of certain things I wasn't pleased with and engage in new practices along the way. So that became this real sort of exciting moment for me, and this inner exploration. Whereas with this series, it was this outer exploration with the environment surrounding me. Suddenly I started going within and doing, really exploring what was happening within myself. And yoga and meditation became a really big part of my life. And I started cycling in different ways and experimenting with diet. And those things all had really interesting results. And it was all experiential. I wouldn't go anything on blind faith. I would come up with an idea and then try it for a while and then see if it worked. And if it did, I would hold on to it. And a lot of those practices I've still held on to along the way. Thankfully, JJ mentioned my place on Johns Island. It's hard to get a sense for scale here, but I was able to buy a 1910 farmhouse with a barn building on it years ago. And the barn building, I think, was the reason why nobody else wanted the place. It was just kind of a spiderweb infested rat hole with dirt floor and everything, but it was exactly what I wanted. And I actually made an offer on the house before I even walked into the house. My real estate agent thought I was crazy. And I said, no, I've been sleeping on a single mattress in my studio. The house is fine. I want the studio. So it took me 2 years to renovate the studio and turn it into something that I could work in. And it's now the most ideal working place I've ever had. And it's been a real good sanctuary for me, surrounded by a lot of the things that y'all are surrounded by here. I have live oaks and magnolias and azaleas and 3 fig trees and a pecan tree, an apple tree, camellias everywhere. And it's really a special place. And so it's been a good place for me to be as I'm sort of engaging on this sort of exploration of unknown territory within myself. And that kind of leads me to this idea of life as creative process. And so let me get to that slide, and I'll show you some of this new work here. Because sometimes it's hard to connect the dots here with this idea of these two pieces being created by the same individual. And for me, it's all connected to this process that I've been engaged in. So you can imagine exploring the exterior world and then this interior world that was guided by this meditative practice that I engaged in. And also just sort of, that led me to Eastern contemplative practices in general. And all of that imagery, just this rich imagery to pull from. And it started to find its way into my artwork. And I've never been one to feel like once I find something that I'm engaged in creatively, that it needs to be the same thing I do for the rest of my life. Because I'm not going to be the same person for the rest of my life. So as I shift and evolve, my work shifts and evolves with me. And so all of these pieces were sort of started to be born out of that process. And thankfully, I had enough income coming in from the sale of the work that people knew me for, that I was able to work on these without any sort of reason to sell them. So I just started stacking them up. I was kind of hoarding them for years, maybe 5 or 6 years. And so there's maybe 20 of these large pieces here. And along the way, a lot of those pieces that I was just showing you, the Buddhas happen to be painted on top of old photographs. So if I had an image where there was any sort of damage to it for any reason, and oftentimes this happened, there was, I would roll it up and I would stack it away. And then when this new series started, I realized, oh, it's a great opportunity for me to reuse all that old canvas, and I started painting on top of it. Sometimes you can see references to the landscapes behind, sometimes they're completely covered, because these have so many layers. It's painting, screen printing, photography, handwriting. It's a little bit of everything, all mixed up into one. And so this idea all culminated in an exhibition I did, and it just ended at the tail end of December. That was called Awake, and it was at the City Gallery at Waterfront Park in Charleston, and there were 90 original pieces there. And it was the largest, most fully realized exhibition of my career. And it had a full audio component with wireless headphones that people would put on their way in, with music in 3 different zones, designed and produced and inspired by my artwork from 3 different friends who are just really talented musicians with a few Grammys and a few Tonys spread out between them. They're really talented people that I was fortunate enough to be working with. And so there's 8 sequential rooms throughout this exhibit. And you walk in and there's actually a black box theater room at the very beginning that 15 people could fit into. And the piece I'll show you in a minute was the very first piece in this exhibition. So bear in mind that what you see in a minute will be just one part of 8 parts. And it's sort of, the rest of the exhibition led you through a sequential progress that kind of led you up at the beginning and then wound you down at the end. And so this first bit was kind of set up to kind of knock people over the head on the way in. So what I realized is that I'm a little sometimes frustrated with traditional galleries and museums. I find that people don't allocate enough time or headspace to fully get into what's happening when they walk into the space. And so they'll come in and do a circle and then walk back out, and they've got something on their mind on the way in and something on their mind very clearly. There's an appointment or something else happening right after. So the video piece that I did at the beginning was designed to rattle you out of the normal headspace, and it was really successful in that way. And you'll see in a minute. And to then be more receptive to what followed, and what followed, like I said, with these 8 sequential rooms. The piece was inspired by this idea that I feel like in Western society we are inundated with so much visual stimuli on a daily basis that I really don't think humans in general have adapted to this onslaught of visual stimuli. And there seems to be like a low-level, omnipresent anxiety. And every time I ask people about this, I get a lot of head bobbing. So it's there. And I don't know if we've adapted to what to do with it. So my meditation practice has been really healthy for me as far as that goes. And I was sort of translating my practice and this idea of the monkey mind. It's a Buddhist term for the churning, whirling things that happen in your brain, whether you want them to or not. And so these are all images from the exhibit that just came down, sort of room by room. And so that's a lot of sort of some backstory to the exhibition and to the piece you're about to see. And at the tail end of the video piece, there'll be a sign that comes up that says, please press your button to change your headsets to the next channel. Because that's what was happening at the exhibit. So, of course, you can disregard that information. So what I would like to do is show you this piece. And this is it here. Get it up here. And a little breathe here. I'm going to step through the door and change really quick and come back and sit here, and then there'll be 12 minutes of this piece. Thank you. 226.
self-compassion for others is healing myself is compassion for others is healing myself is compassion for others is healing myself is. I gotta take this practice with cultivation of awareness, my body, my heart, my mind, the benefit of myself, the benefit of all separate life.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Wow. I figured it was something different, right? So, I'll go ahead while this was a piece that was in the final room of the exhibition space that was meant to sort of wind you back down. So I'll go ahead and just have this playing in the background while we have a little Q&A. If anybody has any questions about anything, I'm happy to answer them. And then I'm sure people are anxious to eat and have something to drink. And
Oh, you're great.
oh, thank you. So, yeah.
I'd like to know more of the actual steps in your process. Did you take the photograph?
The steps in my process,
The steps.
with regards to which part, the like this series or this.
Well, start with that one.
Well, this is it's really a meditation on landscape, and
But as far as the physical taking of the photograph.
I'm actually moving the camera across the horizon. I don't use a tripod. I'm pretty steady, and I don't like to carry it around too often. So I just thankfully the horizon line everywhere around here is pretty straight. So as long as I can move across that horizon line, I can blend and blur everything at a longer exposure, so I can remove all the little infinite details. And for me, it starts to remind me more of my memory. So like if I was to take a picture of this whole scene right here, I could go in tomorrow on my camera and take a look at the photo and remember every single and get right down in close on every single face in the room. But that's not that's not what this experience is for me right now. It's more of an overall experience of an emotional quality and a tone that's here in the room. And so that's what I'm trying to capture in this work. It's not the infinite details, but more of the essence of the experience of being
And
there.
then you project it on a canvas. You put it
I
on
print it on a canvas, yeah. So basically all monitors and cameras, there's a certain color gamut that's possible. So with additive property, which means color passing through the pixels of a monitor at your eyes, that's additive. The potential for color, if it's this big, then what a printer can reproduce out of this many colors is about this many. And it's because this is subtractive, light's bouncing off of it towards your eyes. And so I have a color proofing process that I've developed over the course of the years where originally this digital process of printing is so young that when I first started to do this, I was having somebody do this for me. I was going in and having him print it for me. And eventually he said, "John, I got to be honest with you, you're a real pain in the ass. You need to buy this printer yourself. I don't want to deal with you anymore." So I said, "Okay, cool, I'll do that." So I went and bought the printer, and I've been sort of experimenting ever since on how to do it. Because it wasn't a manual. If you wanted to print in a darkroom, you could buy Ansel Adams series 1, 2, and 3, and you got everything you need to know. But if you wanted to do this process, there was no book anywhere. Or if there was, everybody had a conflicting way of describing how to do it. So I kind of had to wing it and figure it out as I go. And so I figured out a way to get the printer to print out more colors than it should. Because color is so paramount to me here. And that's taken a little while. Yeah?
Are there any technical things that you can't do that you would like to do that you could do if they were invented going forward?
Oh, it's a good question, boy. Oh boy. Well, I've been doing a lot more film work recently, and so there's quite a bit to learn in that arena. And that whole piece that I showed you, including this here, was all shot with my iPhone. And I love the idea of the simplicity of this little teeny thing in my pocket and not having to carry around this giant bag and tripod and everything. And it's just everything in one. And so it was an experiment, really. So I would like to... What's that?
What would you like to have that you don't have?
Technically, you know, I had a real interesting moment when I was painting for this series here. Some of the paintings have more painterly detail than others, and I had this moment where I realized that I had the technical ability to reproduce anything with a paintbrush that I wanted to, and it was just sort of, not in an arrogant way, just in a wow, that's amazing sort of a way. And so I haven't really considered sort of anything beyond what I just accomplished this past few months, because that was sort of the biggest thing I'd ever done. And my idea was, all along, Pam asked me if I could come in October. And I was mounting this exhibition in October, and I said, oh, I can't come in October, but January would be wonderful, because maybe then I could figure out what the hell I'm doing next. So that's what I'm here for, and I haven't quite figured it out yet. And I guess sometimes there's this guy I listen to who I love, and he says, you'll know what you need to know when you need to know it. And sometimes what you need to know is you don't know. So I guess that's where I am right now. I don't know. Yeah.
So these are photographs printed on canvas.
Yes.
Do you ever paint the idea or paint on top of
With this series, I really want it to be photography. I'm really drawn to the idea that originally, with this series in particular, I've had people ask me that before, I really want them to be photographs. That's intentional. And I don't want them to be paintings, because I want them to appear as paintings. And the idea for me has a lot to do with this sort of back and forth between aesthetic and process. So over the years, ever since photography's invention, people who would approach it next to a painting would say, on a relative value scale, here's painting, here's photography. And so everybody who sees this work says, that's a beautiful painting. And I say, oh, it's not, it's a photograph. And I'll explain the whole process. I'll take 5-10 minutes to explain the whole thing. And they'll say, oh, wow, well, it really is a beautiful painting. So I love that it sort of shifts people's ideas about the relative value of painting. And so for me, the aesthetic value of a work should always be paramount to the process. The process should always be secondary. And it may be add value to your experience, but artwork is all about seeing it, not about talking about it. And you see it first, and then you can talk about it. Maybe it would raise your value perspective. Yeah.
But you did have the New York Stock Exchange rising.
They're all sort of.
Can you repeat what?
She wanted to know why this Buddha here has the New York Stock Exchange in it, and it's a long answer, but all of that particular work, I decided I was going to take in all the visual input I got just on a normal day throughout my comings and goings. I go to New York a lot, and turn it back around and push it back out into my artwork, and just see. For me, it was a way of getting it out rather than it all staying in here, and at the same time, I don't know if you noticed, but this particular perspective is looking down at the corner of 5th and 42nd in Manhattan. I'm on the 60th floor of a building, looking down off a balcony, and you can see the edge of the bricks right here. And these are taxi cabs, and that's the yellow line in the street. And a friend of mine who runs a really successful hedge fund and owns 2 of these pieces has his office there. And so it had this sort of connection for me that felt right. But with this series, honestly, sometimes I don't plan these in advance. They develop as they go, and sometimes, I kind of followed de Kooning's one of his quotes where he said, "A good painting is never finished; you just abandon it." and I don't know if I believe I abandoned them, but I get to a point where I look and go, I can't do anymore. It's finished. But I never know until I get to that point. So, yeah.
I see the height of the horizon on all their marsh photos is the same, it's identical.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, why did you choose that height firstly, and then why are they all the same?
I suppose it was the challenge of it. There's this woman I love who wrote a book about color theory. Her name's Luigiana Grandus, and in the very beginning of the book, she had the quote that talks about it's very important to learn the rules before you break them. And one of the quintessential rules of landscape is to never put the horizon in the middle. You put it 1/3 up or 1/3 down. And so I decided, well, I don't want to do that. and so the horizon is always dead center. And for me, it's because when I stand in front of this landscape, the sky and the land are of equal importance to me. And particularly coming from from California. I'd never seen any clouds like these until I moved here, and they're just so low and so massive sometimes that they reminded me of giant mountains. So I wanted to give equal importance to the sky and the foreground. So every horizon line in that series is dead center. And it was a challenge to do that. Some of them are square dead center, which is another big sort of thing that you say not to do. But I think they work. Yeah, Steve.
Given the level of prices today in modern art, contemporary art, I should say,
Yeah.
how important do you think skill is compared to marketing and pricing art?
It depends on whose importance you're referring to. I think from an artist standpoint, I think there's no substitute for skill, and I think that unfortunately we've reached a point to where contemporary art is done fast because it's all about the idea, not about the execution, and it's a lot of people are striving to be different, simply for difference sake, and they're not trying to be authentic for who
What do
they
you
are.
think that bodes for art in general?
I think it's a rubber band effect. I think it'll swing back. And what happens is, if you look at the history of art, you go back only 150 years, and everybody was painting for big patrons. Nobody could do what they wanted. Me doing whatever I wanted to was unheard of. And so, if you go through from never being able to do really what you wanted to suddenly this wide open territory, and you look at what people do, they go explore this wide open territory until they've reached the edges. And I think we've kind of reached the edges of a lot of that, where people have then said, okay, a lot of this has been covered, now I'm just going to go try and do something different. And to me, a lot of times that lacks authenticity. So I think authenticity will start to come back into the fray, and you'll see more skill and execution of interesting ideas. Like the series with the Buddhas and the show I just mounted, it was 6 years in the making. And I wanted you to be able to feel like I spent time on it. I didn't want it to feel fast, unless that was my intention, to make it feel fast. But that was not my intention.
So you think that's coming back?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think all good things end up springboarding back. I hope so. I tend to be a bit of an optimist, I guess, if I get down to it. Yeah.
I guess I wanted to ask you about that. I wanted to ask you about your earlier comment about not knowing what's next.
Oh, yeah.
For you. I get the impression that you're sort of fearless, but I wonder whether you get nervous or you have anxiety about what you're going to find next, or are you confident that it's going to find you?
I guess the latter, but it's something that I've recently come to. It's not something I've been I've been able to embody my entire life. It happened over the course of me doing that inward journey, and I started looking at every little thing, and fear was one that came up very clear to me as something I needed to investigate. And so I started investigating what it means. So it's this thing to recoil from, right? You fear. So I'm not talking about people coming at you with a bat or a gun or something. I'm talking about fear about something that you might do that would expose you. And your heart rate might start to get a little louder. You might start to recoil a little bit. You might start to shrink down a little bit. And so I was like, well, those are just physical sensations. What is it really? And for me, I found that oftentimes, and almost every time, fear in that way was something that meant it was an unknown arena, that if you stepped into it and crossed that threshold, you would suddenly be in a place where there's the most amount of growth you could possibly encounter. More than any other area you could possibly get into so I started saying, I want to test this out. Every time I'm afraid of something, I'm going to step towards it instead of recoil. And it became a really fascinating experiment. And again, it was experiential, so I was testing the results. How does this work? And I thought, oh, there's like gold mine. Every time I see fear and I step towards it, it's a gold mine. So then I've adopted that philosophy. It doesn't mean I don't get nervous or anxious about things, though. But I do it anyways, because I know past results have led me to interesting discoveries within that particular arena. Yeah. Yeah. Wrap it up?
I'll wrap it up.
All right.
Another question you didn't get answered, come on up here, and otherwise we're going to make sure we get you fed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.